Howdy folks. We're now going to talk about product sum factoring. Okay, you should have just viewed the video on greatest common factor, and then after that the video on grouping, factoring by grouping. And so now we're going to do factoring, which I call product sum factoring. Some people just call it basic trinomial factoring, but you'll see in a minute why I call it product sum factoring. Let's say that we have an example here. Let's say that we have an expression x squared plus 9x plus 20. Now this is probably what a lot of math teachers would consider the most basic kind of polynomial factoring or quadratic factoring. Okay, we have a quadratic x to the second power, and it is a trinomial. It has three parts. It has a first term, a second term that's x to the first power, and a third term which does not have an x in it. Well, the basic idea here, it's a very simple process, is you just want to identify two numbers that multiply to this number but add up to this number. So two numbers that when you multiply those two numbers together, they equal the last number. But when you add those two numbers together, they equal the middle number. So let's think of all the numbers that multiply to equal 20, okay? Well, there's 1 and 20. Let's not forget -1 and -20, because two negatives are equal to a positive, right? So we have to remember that. Then there's 2 and 10. And then there's -2 and 10. Then there's 4 and 5. Excuse me, that's -2 and -10. Sorry about that, folks. -2, -10. Then there's 4 and 5, and then there's -4 and -5. Now what we can do is we can add these pairs together to see what they equal added. Okay, so this is multiplied. Now we'll add them together and see what we get. Well, 1 plus 20 is 21. The number we're looking for is 9. We're looking for 9, okay? And 1 plus 20 is 21. -1 plus -20 is -21. Also not what we're looking for. 2 plus 10 is 12. Not what we're looking for. -2 and -10 is -12. Not what we're looking for. 4 plus 5 equals 9. That's what we're looking for, is 9. So these are our two numbers, +4 and +5. If we had done -4 and -5, that would have been -9, and that's also not what we're looking for. We are looking for +9. And so our two numbers are +4 and +5. Well, Mr. Ryan, what do I do with those numbers now that I have them? Glad you asked that question. Here's what we do. Your answer will always look like this. It will always be a pair of parentheses, and they will always be binomials, two parts, okay? The first part will always be an x. So now we just got to figure out, this is going to be x and then plus or minus a number, and this one is also going to be x and plus or minus a number. Well, what numbers should I put there? The two numbers that we just found, +4 and +5. So we're going to put a +4 in one of them and a +5 in the other one, and we're done. We factored it. Okay? So you could also write it as x plus 5 times x plus 4. It doesn't matter what order you put them in. This one can go second and this one can go first. It doesn't really matter. Let's do another example, shall we? All right. This time I'm going to skip the part where I list out all the numbers, and we're just going to think to ourselves, what two numbers? Let's try this one. We'll go x squared plus 4x plus 3. Okay? All right. So remember, our idea here is that we want to identify a number, two numbers. We want to identify two numbers that multiply to this number but add up to this number, right? Okay, so 3, the only numbers I can think of that multiply up to 3 are 3 and 1. So 1 and 3, right? The other possibility is -1 and -3. All right, so these are because -1 times -3, negative times a negative makes a positive, right? So then what's 1 plus 3? Well, they add up, these add up to 4, and negative 1 plus negative 3 adds up to negative 4. Well, which one are we looking for? We're looking for positive 4. So it's got to be these two numbers. So it's positive 1 and positive 3. So let's go ahead and put it into our two pairs of parentheses. Then we're going to have an x in front of each one. Then one of our numbers is positive 1. The other one is positive 3, and it's factored, and we're good to go. Okay? And you may be wondering, well, hey, are you sure that that works out? Are you sure that that's the correct factorization? Well, you can check it by distributing. And whatever method you like for distributing, some people use the X method, and some people use the box method, and I use what I call hills and valleys, and that's where I draw lines. I know I have to multiply x times x, that's x squared, and then x times 3, that's plus 3x. Then 1 times x, that's plus x, and then 1 times 3 is 3. And I can combine these two middle terms, and I get x squared plus 4x plus 3, which is the same as what we started with. So sure enough, it does work. Okay? All right. Let's try another example. This one, why don't you try it? Okay? It's going to be x squared. We're going to factor x squared minus 10x plus 21. Now, why don't you pause the video and see if you can factor this one yourself? Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to try this. Well, we know that our answer is going to look like this. It's going to be two sets of parentheses, and each one is going to start with an x. So now we just need to know what two numbers multiply to 21 but add up to, now bear in mind here, this is negative 10, okay? So two numbers that multiply to 21 are 7 and 3, right? Because 3 times 7 is 21, right? Except that 3 plus 7 is equal to positive 10, not negative 10. Now, when you see that happen, that basically means that you should have used the negative versions of the numbers. So instead of 3 and 7, it should be negative 3 and negative 7, because negative 3 times negative 7 is also 21, but when you add negative 3 and negative 7, you get negative 10, which is what we're looking for. So our two numbers are negative 3 and negative 7. So we're going to put a negative 3 here and a negative 7 there. And we're factored. And you could check it if you wanted to. It'll come out to x squared minus 10x plus 21. Let's see here. Maybe you could come up with one yourself. Just pick two numbers and see if you can figure it out. Let's see. Just throwing something out here. Let's just make up two numbers. What do we say? How about a negative 6 and a negative 5, okay? Well, I could write up a cubic trinomial here using these. If I add these two, negative 6 plus negative 5, that's negative 11. And then I just put an x on it. And negative 6 times negative 5 is positive 30. There we go. And so that would be the polynomial. This is what I could factor this then. Okay, so then I could do this, put an x here and an x here. What two numbers multiply up to 30, but they add up to negative 11? Ooh, let me think, negative 5 and negative 6, right? Negative 5 times negative 6 is 30. Negative 5 plus negative 6 is negative 11. So negative 5, negative 6, and it's factored, okay? All right, let's try another one. How about x squared minus 6x plus 5. All right, well, we know our answer is going to have two sets of parentheses, each one starting with an x, okay? And then, now, what are two numbers that multiply to 5? Well, 5, you could get positive 5 from either 5 and 1 or negative 5 and negative 1. Well, we have a negative over here. So if we're going to add two negative numbers, we'll get a negative. But if we added two positive numbers, 1 and 5, we'd get a positive number, positive 6. But we want a negative number. So it should be negative 5 and negative 6. negative 5, and negative 1. So I'll put a negative 5 here and a negative 1 because negative 5 times negative 1 is positive 5, and negative 5 plus negative 1 is negative 6. All right, let's try just a couple more here. I think you're kind of on a roll. This one, I want you to pause the video and try it for yourself. What if it was x squared plus 5x minus 14? Why don't you pause this and try it on your own? Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to try this one. Did you notice something interesting about this negative 14? If we need two numbers that multiply to negative 14, wouldn't that have to be a positive number and a negative number? Because if you multiply two positives, this would be a positive. If you multiplied two negatives, then this would be a negative. Or excuse me, if you multiplied two negatives, then this would also be a positive. So the only way you can get a negative here is if you multiplied a positive and a negative. So we know that our answer is going to look like this. It's going to be two sets of parentheses, an x and an x, but one of them has to be positive and one of them has to be negative. Now, what two numbers multiply to equal 14? Well, I hope you were thinking 7 and 2 because that's correct. But now the question is, should the 7 be negative or should the 7 be positive? Okay, well, you can try each one. If you had a negative 7, you would have a positive 2. If you had a negative 2, you would have a positive 7. Well, let's add these together. Negative 7 plus 2 is negative 5. Negative 2 plus 7 is positive 5. And which one are we dealing with? We've got a positive 5. Therefore, it's negative 2 and positive 7. So it's going to be plus 7 minus 2. Try a couple more here. I think this will get you, after a couple more here, you should be pretty strong in product sum factoring. All right, let's try x squared minus 12x minus 13. Okay, why don't you pause the video, try this on your own, and then we'll go over it. All right, so hopefully you had a chance to try this out. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 13. Well, the only thing that multiplies to 13 is 1 and 13, right? So, but one of them has to be negative. So it's either negative 1 and positive 13, or it's positive 1 and negative 13. Well, if we add these two together, negative 1 and positive 13, we get positive 12. But this says minus 12. So it must be positive 1 and negative 13. So we just set up our parentheses like we've been doing, put an x in each one of them, give one of them a plus 1, and the other one a negative 13, and you're good to go. All right, so this should give you a good understanding of product sum factoring. You could make some on your own, or you should be able to try a lot of them. Just remember, in product sum factoring, in this simple kind of product sum factoring, there's always a 1 in front of the x squared. There's no number there. In every single one of these examples that we did, there's no number up here. Okay, we're going to learn how to do those in a different video. Okay?